Yes. Hi everyone. Thanks very much, Alok. It's good to have everyone here. So what I really propose to speak about in the next few minutes is three things. One, as Alok said, sort of why accessibility matters and why this is something that we should care about. The findings that we will discuss later today. Two, how all of you in your everyday lives can foster greater accessibility by practicing inclusion towards persons with disabilities. And three, why accessibility benefits everyone, not just people with disabilities. So turning to the first issue then, as to why accessibility matters, there is massive inaccessibility of services and products and services for persons with disabilities in India in terms of physical access as well as digital access. So let me just give you a couple of concrete examples to be able to illustrate that point. And of course, you will hear more Damini talking more about this in the context of the report that Vidhi has done. But I will speak from my lived experience because that's what I am more well equipped to do. So one issue that I have really been passionate about and working on in the last few months has been the issue of digital accessibility, because while you can still understand in the context of physical inaccessibility that buildings were designed, many buildings were designed decades ago without access, without the needs of the disabled in mind, and therefore you can still understand why things are less accessible than you would like them to be. There's no such justification for lack of digital access, because embedding accessibility into technological solutions doesn't really cost that much more, and all that it requires is some forethought and proactive effort. uh, but still there is, with a couple of colleagues have been working on figuring out how much inaccessibility there is, and we found we through a survey we created a list of 42 inaccessible apps and websites which range across sectors, from booking food online through an app like Zomato and Swiggy, which was also earlier inaccessible, to finding accommodation through something like Oyo, to dating apps like Bumble or Tinder, to using something like Urban Company if you want your house to be repaired in some shape or form. There's inaccessibility in all of these solutions, and much of this could have been addressed if only people who have designed these apps were thoughtful about the needs of the disabled. And that's what while this is sort of in terms of the scale of the problem, but in terms of why this matters now, to an able-bodied person who can just pick up their phone and order food or use a Make My Trip to book a ticket or just go and use the metro, these issues would seem very theoretical and abstract, but to someone with a disability, even if there are just 2-3 people in a particular room who are disabled, if you can't access it, then that's as good as non-existent for you. Like, imagine having to read a text in a foreign language that you do not understand, or having to swim with one leg and one arm. So it's somewhat like that, having to access, having to work with an inaccessible platform. And therefore, it is imperative that we work on accessibility in a constructive fashion. And then the second thing I will say is in terms of what each of us can do in our everyday lives. So we think of accessibility in terms of, it's a broader systemic issue. And we were talking with Mr. Basavaraju, who you will hear from later on about this, as to how it all really starts at the individual level. So let me give you in fact, let me ask you this, because I often tend to do this when I speak to audiences about this. How many of you use Instagram? And someone can just do a show of hands and tell me this. Like, roughly what percentage of people in the audience use Instagram? All right, fair enough. And how many of you, when you put up posts or stories on Instagram, provide image descriptions for that content? Just two people, right? So now and all of you are obviously committed to this cause, otherwise you wouldn't be here, right? It's not like you actively have anything against people with disabilities, which is why you set your face against putting this up. But it's just something that hasn't crossed your mind. And maybe, you know, some people, when I go to law school, like I was at NUJS last week, one fellow was saying that it's because I've not yet had the opportunity to speak to someone with a disability, which is why I don't do this. But you see, therein lies the problem. You know, that should be cause for introspection as to why it is that you've not had meaningful engagement with someone with a disability till now, given that the disabled are 15% of the world's population. So therefore, there are, you know, what I would urge you to do is small, simple little things in your everyday life that can make things accessible, like putting up image descriptions in whatever posts you put up on social media, making sure that content that you put out, which is in audio form, has subtitling. If you are a private sector or, you know, public sector, you know, establishment, that you have an equal opportunity policy, which the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act requires. If you are a media company, that you provide audio description for your content. Just always, if you're designing a website or putting out PDF documents, making sure that they're accessible, just having this be something that you actively account for is something that can make a huge difference. And the third and final thing which I will say is as to why accessibility benefits everyone. And I understand that this is contested territory, because some people say, why should we have to please able-bodied people to get our needs met? Like, should it not be enough that our needs require accessibility? Why should it be useful to the able-bodied also? But in some circles, I understand that this argument works, so I will make it anyway. And the point here really is that, you know, I'll give you a few examples to illustrate this. Now, let's imagine that there's a ramp in a school which is designed for people on wheelchairs, but actually even someone, you know, children who would fall on the stairs because it's a spiral staircase or something like that, can actually benefit from that ramp. Similarly, if, you know, there's content for learning disabled students, you know, the learning disabilities, that is provided in simple, accessible formats, that will even benefit people who aren't able to follow that content because they may be slow learners, or they may have intelligence deficits, which can enable them to deal with that content more effectively. If somebody is describing a graph for the benefit of visually challenged students in the class, that kind of descriptive content will benefit even people who are visually challenged, who are not visually challenged. I'll give you one quick example. You know, I was in China a couple of years ago, and we had gone to this museum in Shanghai where they were putting up these, where there were these pictures of people in Nazi Germany, I think. For instance, there was this picture of a man who was in a swimming pool. And, you know, I asked the curator of the museum some questions about those pictures as to what they depicted, and tried to connect it with the with Hannah Arendt's idea of the banality of evil. And later on, a couple of my sighted friends told me how, you know, because I had asked those questions, they learned more about those pictures than they would have if they had just seen them on their own terms. So the point being that, you know, it's to everyone's benefit that we foster greater accessibility. So that's it. As far as I am concerned, I'll now hand it over to my colleague Damini, who will describe the key findings of this report to you, and happy to engage more later should the need arise. Thank you.